Alright, we're back, and today the discussion revolves around solo players and the solo gameplay experience of WoW. Has it become better in the War Within? Will it improve? There are, without a doubt, people who enjoy the game without the stress of humans on their mind. So let's see if the changes to it made it possible and better than in the past. Has WoW become a better game as a solo player? Should you play WoW solo? First of all, before we get into that, can you play WoW solo is a much better question. It's safe to assume that over the years, WoW has become consistently more solo player friendly. We as a community have criticized the lack of social elements for a long time, but from where I am standing, we aren't really socializing that much either, and I'll tell you more about that and what I mean later in the video. The social aspect has been cross-referenced with old school WoW for quite a while, where the comparison has always put classic ahead of the live retail game. But they are two very different games entirely, and the gaming world has evolved since 2004. In terms of actual solo content, there are quite a few things people can do, and it all starts with leveling a character. Not only is the entire leveling process fully doable as a solo player, you can choose any of the past expansions to do it in, giving you quite a bit to do and explore. Once that is done and you reach level 60, you basically start the War Within or the respective expansion at the time. The story campaign is 100% soloable now. And I know I said you could solo level your way to 60, but with the past expansions you couldn't really complete the story in a solo way, since the story would always culminate within the raid of that expansion. And as you might guess, you would need people for that. Not anymore. With the War Within, you can now do the story dungeons with followers, which are essentially scripted AI that are coded in a way to absolutely annihilate all content with just the basic spells available. Since they are not real players that interact with you in any meaningful way, it would be kind of like fake solo content, since you're not actually alone, but real solo content in a sense that you don't need other people to play the game. Similarly, the raid has a story mode option that lets you fight Ansurek for the purpose of finishing the story in Ashkahet and the 11.0 patch entirely. And once you are here, you have officially finished the campaign and are left with just the endgame. Endgame for MMOs are most of the time group content like raids and dungeons, but since your goal is to play solo, we will assume you won't be interested in those. And even if you are, follower dungeons are still a thing, while story mode raid isn't really going anywhere. Sure, they give lower rewards, but also require close to no effort to complete. What the War Within did better than any past expansion outside open world content is introducing the delves. Now, delves are a new feature that pits you alone against a challenge that is similar to a dungeon or even a raid, albeit at a much smaller scale, since, you're alone. Well, with Bran, but he is an NPC and sometimes makes you wish you had real players with you instead. However much people dismiss delves as an endgame content, they have succeeded at offering people that cannot engage with social groups something to do. It's part of the endgame now, with increasing difficulty and rewards that reward your continuous progression on your class and in the game as a whole. And that doesn't mean they are without issues, but that would be true for pretty much anything ever made in a video game ever. Through delves, by the use of bountiful delves and maps, you can acquire hero track gear, which is equivalent to heroic rating and mythic plus all the way to +9, so quite a bit, if not the majority of the endgame rewards are packed in a system that you can do on your own time, at your own pace, stop and pause whenever you like, add more people if you feel like it, and generally finish it in anywhere between 10 minutes and forever. There is literally no pressure or constraint on performance outside making sure you just don't die too much, which is partly a barrier in an RPG. From all of these points of view, the solo aspect of WoW has indeed improved and made the game way better for people who just want to take it slow, tackle the content at a relaxing pace, experience the story, theme, and world of a patch without feeling the drive, requirement, or even pressure to play with other people. But there are more ways to play the game in a solo way, if we assume that solo means not having pre-made groups such as guilds or the legendary elusive friends. And that is, of course, engaging the game as a pug player to attempt to clear actual raid difficulties all the way to and even including mythic, as well as pushing keys. Being a pug is a totally different experience when playing World of Warcraft, and it is an experience some people are more comfortable with playing. Marcelian and I and other players like us wouldn't choose to be a part of the pug world, but that doesn't mean we don't experience it or be on the receiving end of its shortcomings. Over the years, we have pugged many a key and raids trying to achieve a particular score or loot a certain item or legendary. The game being better as a pug player is unfortunately directly correlated with the perceived meta and balance of classes and content. What this means is that when you engage with the game as a pug player, you are either the one making a group and getting people in, or the one trying to get in. By the nature of group making, there are more people trying to get into groups than actually making groups, and because of that, you are at the mercy of the person inviting them. Convincing somebody to invite you will be a process that is mostly accomplished by the class and spec you are playing. This is where the perceived meta comes in, together with the class balance, since they go hand in hand to an extent. If you are playing a spec deemed bad, you will have a harder time getting into groups. If you are playing a class or a spec in a particularly difficult content, you being a meta player might not even matter as much, since people might look at other markers of competence like item level, mythic plus score, or raid bosses killed. You could be a feral druid trying to get into a group and get declined, since feral is usually a very undervalued spec. But if you are a feral druid with ridiculously high item level, a mythic plus score way above the dungeon you are applying to, or many mythic bosses killed overqualifying you for a heroic raid, you will likely get in quicker than the enhancement shaman 20 levels lower than you with 500 less score, and you get the picture. I understand there are too many specific situations where what I said might not be applicable, but the concept remains. Overall, at least since Battle for Azeroth, that is 3 expansions ago, class balance and content design has become way more accessible to the entire pool of specs and classes of the game. People are often lost in the sauce when it comes to their own personal biases at play, but I can tell you for sure there was a time when Affliction and Subtlety rogues were more than 5 to 6 key levels behind the meta, not even able to clear plus 15s in the old dungeon system, or barely killing mythic bosses, or even getting KSM or things like that, while now they would be considered unplayable by the more try-hard community if there are 2 key levels behind. Not to mention that the increasing cadence of balance tuning for specs and classes has made it sure that everybody will have time to shine. Exhibit A is right in front of you. As a fire mage, I started and stayed as one, if not the worst raid spec for over 2 months, one of, if not the worst dungeon DPS specs with damage profiles that competed with tanks, and now we are buffed enough where I can duke it out with enhancement shamans. Similarly, Prot Paladin was the least performing tank together with Brewmaster, where you could fall flat on your face on the first dungeon pack. Now they are pushing keys above what every other tank can do. These are just a few examples, and yes, unfortunately not every spec is enjoying pendulum swings in performance, but it is clear that once a spec is bad for long enough, they will get buffed to be able to compete, if not at least clear endgame content reliably. What remains to be discussed is the content design in terms of accessibility. This season is one of the hardest seasons we have ever had in WoW, of late anyway. Mythic Plus in particular has taken a big leap in difficulty, getting a lot of players for being able to play, which in turn promotes pre-made style groups that can offset the difficulty with communication and social relationships that might get a friend playing a feral into a group, whereas that feral would get no invites for any endgame content period. This alone would make the game much worse for a solo player, and has done so already. I can sit here and tell you it will 100% get better, but for a sane player that might not matter, since the time is now and not tomorrow. So in the end, is it worth it? I mentioned at the start that the social aspect isn't really engaged upon even by people who complained it was lost and needed to be brought back. People like Marcelian and I. As much as we like socializing with the players we are doing dungeons and raids with, we don't really do it. All of the socializing happens outside of the game, in our Discord calls. In the end, I guess that is all socializing, just a different kind than the one that we would think would be inside of the game. I believe there are 2 types of solo players that can enjoy the game. One would be the player that is just not interested in playing WoW as an MMORPG, but rather just as an RPG. This player would like to do quests, level reputations, do a delve, maybe see the raid and call it a day. This could be your average dad or mom with a lot of stuff on their plate and no real time to dedicate to a guild for raiding or a group to push keys with. It could also be the player that is just uncomfortable socializing and would prefer to keep to themselves when it comes to video games. But there's just this itch, this WoW itch they cannot scratch, so they play the solo aspect of it without interacting with the endgame raiding and Mythic Plus or even PvP. For these types of players, the game has become way better to play in a solo fashion with everything we mentioned so far. The other player would be the one interested in endgame but either no desire to make friends, find guilds, or a lack of ability to do those things. That player prefers to just use the looking for group tool and become a part of the pug world. The game has been made easier to solo as a pug as well, with the multitudes of gear sources you can chase that do not require pre-made groups. Those are also a factor here, but professions as well. For this player, it might suck to play at this moment. The game is difficult, which creates barriers of entry when it comes to getting into groups. Barriers like off-meta specs barely getting invites. Barriers like mechanics and encounters that require voice communication to defeat. We believe the game is much more enjoyable with a group of people you can consistently play with. They can be friends, guildies, or just Battle.net buddies you make along the way. It is not required, but definitely more enjoyable. Indeed, WoW still has a bunch of things that need to be addressed to have these barriers removed for solo players so they can enjoy a better game. One such barrier was discussed by Marcelian and I in this video right here, and it revolves around gearing. The good news is that these issues are already on the table to be fixed, so the obstacles stopping people from enjoying a solo experience are on their way out one at a time.